They can't really take in other aspects. Whenever you try to push back against them, it seems like they're very hesitant and like, oh, how could you even think against me? But that's what I mean is they've grown up since they were 10. So at least since I was 10, I got a laptop when I was 10. And that's not a brag. That's like unfortunate. Like we've grown up since we were 10 of like, no, this little point, this little part of Instagram, that's reality. And so thinking about spending, the average Gen Z spends 10 hours a day, 100% smartphone adoption across the generation. It's like thinking about if you were 10, the digital narcissism that comes into play, we have no priors for that.
And welcome back to the Money, the Mindset, and the Mentoring podcast. Today we have Ayush Prakash, who's here with us today out of Toronto, man. The very few times do I actually get to talk with somebody who's local to my hometown. And when we were chatting as I was driving from point A to point B, as we were setting this all up, man, we had such a great conversation. And then I went to your website and your Instagram, and I was taking a look at it, the Gen Z Diplomat on Instagram. And I was like, oh man, this is why, because you're so connected to this conversation. And I'm super excited about it, not only as an entrepreneur, but also as a parent and knowing what's coming on. I mean, the future of our next generation is something that's so critically important, and understanding what's important for Gen Z and how to connect with Gen Z and how to actually interface with Gen Z so they can create the successful future that we all need together. And I can't wait for you to unpack this. So thank you very much for being here.
Steve, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, it's a crucial conversation that I don't think we're having enough of. Trying to think about who Gen Z are, what is their place on Earth, and how do other generations interact and react to them. I think we're having some fragmented conversation, but having a holistic one is definitely it's vital.
So being a person who's 48 or 49, am I Gen X or something? Where am I sitting? I don't even know where I sit in that whole.
I think you're Gen X.
Gen X, yeah. So with us, we had a very interesting life. We grew up with like Motley Crue, with the Beastie Boys, with Run DMZ. It was a whole different environment. We were there when the cell phone came out. It was this radically changing landscape. But then when we look at what Gen Z is dealing with, I mean, it's a whole different world. And the pace in which it's changing is so much faster than when we were young. So talk a little bit about what your perspectives are.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great like foundation to build. So Gen Z, for people that don't know, 1997 to 2012. The qualifier I like to use is that other generations adopted technology, whereas Gen Z grew up in technology. So other generations had a kind of analog childhood. You guys went out, you looked at people in the eyes, I think, you guys had advertisements of, do you know where your kids are at night type of thing. And it's like, you guys were never inside. And for Gen Z, we only existed inside. We never got this analog childhood. Our childhood was Facebook, was Twitter, was YouTube. I'm not going to say Netflix, because Netflix, I guess, when I was 10 was still the mail order thing. Yeah. But that's kind of the way that we should start thinking about Gen Z as they're called the digital natives. We're the tech generation. We're almost like a cyborg generation. And I don't mean that in some kind of exaggeratory way. I literally mean that our brains have been molded around technology, and we can get into the nitty gritty of that.
When we look at the idea of the cyborg generation for kids, it's actually a really destabilized cyborg. When we think of Star Trek and the Borg, where they're half computer and they're half human, and they're sort of really integrated as a being, we have this generation that's not analog connected to the world. It's digitally connected to the world, but it's not connected to the digital space. It is analog connected to the digital space, because when we connect with the digital space, we're using our eyes, we're using our hands, we're thumb typing on our screen and scrolling like this. And even when we put on the Oculus or something like that, we're still looking through the lens of an analog world. So they're almost like the imperfect cyborg. And so it's a very hard thing for them to reconcile what reality is. And so tell me about, when you look at from your perspective and you look at the way that somebody like that is interfacing with somebody of my generation, where do you see the largest gaps in how they can communicate?
Well, when you're talking about reconciling with reality, I think that hits, I think that hits a lot of buttons, but Gen Z don't reconcile with reality. So the baby boomers and parts of the millennials, you guys had objective reality. You guys had the newspaper. You guys had the television. And there wasn't an infinity. There wasn't an informational infinity there. There was a limited amount of things that you could understand, that you could work with. But for Gen Z, they grew up in digital infinities. And so when you're thinking about reconciling with reality, you have to think of, okay, I'm spending all of this time on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, all this time on site. My attention bubble, my echo chamber are only things that I find pleasurable, that I agree with. The confirmation bias is crazy. And so my view of reality is going to be far more niched, more narrow than someone like yourself, who grew up in a very, more integrated, holistic world. So that's, again, when we think about, broader topics like political polarization, like social justice, like climate change, it seems like Gen Z is just like hyper focused on very narrow things. They can't really take in other aspects. Whenever you try to push back against them, it seems like they're very hesitant and like, oh, how could you even think against me? But that's what I mean, is they've grown up since they were 10. So at least since I was 10, I got a laptop when I was 10. And that's not a brag. That's like unfortunate. We've grown up since we were 10 of like, no, this little point, this little part of Instagram, that's reality. And so thinking about spending, the average Gen Z spends 10 hours a day, 100% smartphone adoption across the generation. It's like thinking about, if you were 10, the digital narcissism that comes into play, we have no priors for that. We're just imputing as a society.
Yeah, that's a very difficult thing. I look back to 1992 or 93. I think it was somewhere around that time. And I always love looking at science fiction to see how it presents itself in the world. And in 1992, 1993, that's when, in the comic books, that's when Superman died. And I think that was a really interesting moment for that to happen, because that's also when you start looking at, and I get it, we can see this in other elements, but that's also when truth started to die. And when you had right and wrong started to blend. The birth of the anti-hero, real birth of the anti-hero. And we saw all of this start to happen in our social norms. And when we talk about truth, absolute truth is something like gravity. We can generally accept that gravity exists, and it's a truth because I'm not following up right now, so we're doing pretty good on this whole gravity thing. But when it comes to truth, when it goes on the ether, on the internet, the truths become a lot more ambiguous. I mean, the fact that right now you can do such an amazing deep fake that I don't even know if I'm talking to the real version of you right now, let alone you talking to the real version. There's no authentication that happens. Whereas I can see it, I can feel it and touch it. It gives me at least the symbolic gesture of truth.
Yeah, I mean, if we're just riffing, it does seem like truth has fallen out in favor of how you feel. And this is one major thing with Gen Z, is that we're all focused on feeling good. And again, it goes back to the way technology has integrated into our lives, going back to how our dopamine systems have literally evolved with technology, how our reputation systems have evolved with technology. I guess just touching on those 2 points, because I don't want to just gloss over them. So you have a dopamine system. When you're eating a cookie, for example, your dopamine spikes. Again, I'm oversimplifying. And as the cookie kind of registers in your mind, your dopamine starts crashing, you feel pain. And so the immediate next reaction to restore that pleasure is eat another cookie. Now you abstract that out onto social media. Every time you scroll, you feel good. Dopamine slowly comes down, you feel pain. And so what do you do to restore that pleasure? You scroll. And then Instagram introduces the infinite scroll mechanism. And now you have this concept of doom scrolling in Gen Z. And then you apply how the most active times for social media are between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. And you realize that Gen Z are not really sleeping well. And then you kind of have like this recipe for disaster. And that's just one thing. And then you have reputation, which is social metrics give us obviously dopamine, but we're hardwired to put ourselves in hierarchies to distinguish between who has more status, who has less. And then you introduce this retweet function. And then you introduce the concept of likes and followers and seeing these digital social metrics. This is all Tristan Harris's thoughts, by the way. And you start realizing, oh, now I'm going to Twitter not because I find it interesting or because there's anything particularly valuable there. I'm just going there because I'm hardwired to try to, get as much social status as I can. This is just the easiest way. And then you obviously introduce the retweet function, which collapses the proximity to virality. And then you also create, the follower, the echo chamber, and all of that. And then it's like, I'm literally conforming to an algorithm for the chance of going viral to obtain as much social status as possible. And this transcends into TikTok as well. We see Gen Z doing these stupid dances and, messing up the metro and the subway and, being just ostentatious in public. And it's like, why is this generation doing that? Well, they want to be an influencer, the number one job in the generation. And this is their way of trying to gain these billions of followers because they saw 20 other people gaining, hundreds of thousands. And so they think it's, something worth doing.
When we look at the three elements you just hit, I think they're critical and need to be developed in pillars. And the first element, you look at the dopamine dump and then, as you call it, the doom scrolling. And if you think about that in an analog world, it's kind of like going to a haunted house and around every corner, there's something that's going to give you a surprise. You have no idea. When you swipe up, you have no idea. So you get this element of surprise that happens. And as you talk about the cookie story, each time that surprise element drops and drops and drops. So you need to feed more by, this exercise. We're probably going to build up really good parts of our bicep just from, either that or some carpal tunnel around swiping. But the swiping is what gives us that feeling of being at a haunted house, that we never know what's around the corner. And it might be something that we like, or it might be something we don't like otherwise. And it doesn't matter what shows up. We're going to get a reaction. And that's the dopamine dump side of things. Now, if you're looking at that and you're saying that our generation, we'll focus on that one first as a pillar, and then we'll move on to the reputation, and then we'll move on to the next. But let's focus on that one for a minute. And as a parent, and we're looking at our kids in that environment, number one, should we support this endeavor? Or number two, if we're not supposed to support this endeavor, what should we do to counter this endeavor?
Well, Steve, it's a difficult question. I'm not going to pretend like I have any answer for you that's going to be concrete enough to actually enact with your kids. It's a question where I'm also struggling with because I want to have kids, and I'm wondering precisely how do I explain to them all of these things. But let me not try to skirt around the answer. I think conversations about precisely what technology is doing are vital, about how social media really will interact with you. I don't think they have to be this technical or, in depth. I think obviously the way parents talk to kids about having, like, the way I talk about it is we have the sex talk, we have the drug talk. I think we need to integrate the technology talk as well, of being like, hey, your mental health is going to suffer because you're constantly scrolling and seeing all of your friends living these fantastic, incredible lives. And you're going to look at yourself and saying, oh, but I'm not out right now. I'm not at a party right now. I'm not on vacation right now. So what's wrong with me? And talking to your kids about that, I think, is vital. I don't know how you even, look the dopamine conversation in the eye, because I'm not a believer in this very black and white solution of put the phone down. It doesn't really do anything. It's like, telling a heroin addict.
I'm with you 100% on that. When you talk to addiction specialists, and I had one on my podcast just recently that we recorded, it hasn't released yet, but we talked a lot about the idea of how to break addiction. And what he talks about very specifically is the idea of the zero-sum game with addiction never works. Because you're going to get to that point that you're not actually building up an immunity to addiction. What you're doing is you're just creating a barrier that on the other side of that barrier is where you want to be, but you're sitting where you are today. And at some point, you're going to jump over that barrier and go there. So rather than that and having that kind of a relationship, which is a very zero-sum relationship, it's better to have the relationship saying, I know it's over there. And if it's something like having a glass of wine, or it's something like having that cookie or whatever it is, It might be a problem with food. It might be a problem with sex. It might be a problem with substances. And as you said, the fourth one is technology. That's the one that nobody really hits. I've seen people lose relationships over Warcraft and all these other things because they became so addicted to it. But the idea is if you could go into Warcraft and play that game for 20 minutes and then jump off and go do something else, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you have to shut the computer down, put it under lock and key, go out the room, lock the door, hide the key, give it to somebody else, you haven't solved your addiction problem. You've just delayed it.
Hmm. Or worse, I mean, I really hope I'm not giving people ideas, but transferring it over to something else. Because honestly, I would rather my kid be addicted to their phone than hard drugs. Let's be honest. It's kind of picking which devil you want, but being addicted to TikTok isn't really going to kill you. It might just like ruin your social skills, but I don't know. As a parent, how do you feel about that? How do you talk to your kids right now about technology?
I think when I look at their integration with technology, I tend to agree. That's why when we had the original conversation where you talked about, we were introduced to technology where the next generation has been born into it. And if we look even the next generation after that, they're going to be integrated with it. And so they're in this little middle ground that's a really hard ground. So we have to first understand, I think, the frustrations of living that type of life. We have parents who talk about how it was so great. We drove our Camaros and we had mullets and we listened to, some crazy music and had bonfires. And they look at that and they go, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I have that? And so by holding over them and saying that these are all the amazing things that we did, why aren't you doing that? I don't think that creates a really good relationship between parents and children. I think a better relationship is to say, look, this is what you've been born into. This is how you need to integrate with that. And yes, all your friends are not going to want to come over. As much as we say, go see your friends, and we close the door and push them outside, they're not going to go see their friends because their friends don't want to come outside. Or their friends' parents don't push them outside as well, so they never actually connect. And then furthermore, if they don't build those skills with technology, as technology becomes more and more integrated, they don't have the skills to be able to use it. And they become part of that generation who says, I just don't know how to use this stuff. And then they get left behind. So when it comes to the next movement of whether it's Ready Player One style of living or whatever else it is that's going to happen, because it is going to happen, at least when they have some introduction to technology, they're going to have a baseline skill set to deal with it.
And this is one of the problems, is that how do you onboard both generations at the same time? Because I think baby boomers and millennials have to understand how technology is affecting them and Gen Z. And then Gen Z also have to understand how technology is affecting everybody else and also themselves. And it's like, again, this is an opportunity, but every generation has to be aware of precisely what's going on, how social media is affecting them, how artificial intelligence works. I think we can, segue into that if you want. But it's like, yeah, all of the research is out there. Tristan Harris's work is all free. We can understand precisely what's going on up here and then around, in the infosphere. We can understand all of that. But I think we need some drive, like collective drive, to really onboard everybody and then start figuring out, okay, how do we have the conversation of, and I don't know if you want to get into this because it's not safe for work, but how do we have the conversation of pornography in Gen Z? Because it's like, this is the next problem, which some people are talking about, like the red pill community or whatever. I don't want to go there because political affiliations, I'm not interested in that. But it's like, we're not having the conversation of sex and pornography and then how that relates to reproduction, etc. We're not having the conversation of jobs, how UBI is not really going to work, all of that. And so this is this is just the ground zero. And if we can't even enter the building, we have no shot at even trying to figure out solutions.
Well, I think if we first hit the idea of the rewards-based system that happens online and really start to hit that one, and then we can transition right into relationships and how relationships are morphing, and then what that integration looks like, especially with AI. And so when we look at the rewards-based system, I was listening to a podcast with Elon Musk, and he was talking a lot about how gamification is becoming so critically important to integrate into the education system. And because the idea of somebody just sitting at the front of the room and just pontificating, it just doesn't work anymore. The kids, every day my kids come home from school, I'm bored, I'm bored. You're like, well, we just keep on pushing out the door and making them suffer rather than saying, hey, what can we do to improve this education system? See, a lot of the teachers are great teachers, but they haven't integrated into the new methodology of communicating with Gen Z or the generation younger. I don't know what the one after Z is. Do you go back to A again? I'm not sure.
Yeah, Gen Alpha.
What's a Gen Alpha? Okay, there we go. And you know what's interesting? Because Gen Alpha is going to be an alpha generation based on what's going on with tech. So that actually it almost feels weirdly timed. But the idea is that the Gen Z is the last connection to the analog space. And as the last connection to the analog space and the new connection to the digital space, when we're trying to teach them, the reward system has to be so concrete because they're going to follow the successes. See, people, when they start into something, they start with motivation. You know, oh, I really want to do this. I watched the video. I'm going to do it. And then they got to rely on their systems and models to carry them forward, the discipline to do the thing that they want to do. But the thing that underpins that is their willpower. When their willpower is fueled by the successes that they're having. So if we look at the fuel that's happening around, that's underpinning their discipline, that's going to tell you whether they're going to keep on doing something, whether they're going to keep on not doing something, or whether they're actually going to start doing something new. Is understand what their motivation is, understand where their discipline lies, and understand what feeds that underpinning willpower. So when we look at the rewards-based system in a digital space, how do you see that fitting in those three categories?
In terms of education, I'm not a fan of trying to retrofit the system with pre-existing technology. I want to rebuild something better. I don't think that we can, adequately teach Gen Z and retain their willpower with rote education. Like, for example, my high school, there are two examples which kind of don't mean anything, but they also mean everything. I remember bringing back a textbook and my brother's like, oh, I remember reading that. And I was like, because he's 10 years older than me. And I was like, we're reading the same material from a decade apart. And then I also read in The Runaway Species by David Eagleman how the bells that signify switching the subjects, how those date back to the Industrial Revolution, switching the shifts for factory workers. And it's like, again, these are very small things, but they kind of show how old education, like the modern state of education is. And that's kind of a juxtaposition. And so I'm not a fan of trying to retrofit it with, bringing in iPads or trying to use ChatGPT, because we've seen, in the past year how education systems have been disrupted by ChatGPT, and their response is not to update, but either to ban it on school servers or to try to go back to, handwriting. And so it's like, I don't think that we should try and integrate new technologies with an old system. And so this is kind of a BS answer, but it's like, I think we just need to build a new system that's more dynamic. Unfortunately, we will lose a generation. That might be the latter half of Gen Z. It might be the first half of Gen Alpha. But in order to truly, obtain, and this is kind of parallel, but it's like, I want to make education as sticky as social media. Like if we're addicted to social media and we understand how dopamine works, it's like, yeah, I want the social pressure to be put into education. Why am I not teaching my kids with like the Instagram algorithm how to, learn calculus? Or why am I not teaching them genetic modification, for instance, or all of these things? It's like these future circumstances should be already implemented in education, but they're not. It takes so much work to update.
They're just educating something that we maybe want them or not want them to learn. When my son goes on YouTube, for example, and he walks away with how to use his camera in the way to create beautiful shots for his YouTube channel on rivers and streams and all this other stuff, how to move camera angles and that sort of thing. He's using that dopamine hit of scrolling and looking, because his feed keeps on feeding him now what he's been looking for. Or when he's looking for Minecraft techniques and how to build the latest and greatest thing within Minecraft, all these big environments, all the little hacks and everything like that. They've got every Minecraft book under the sun. They've looked at every Minecraft video under the sun. And so they've really dove deep into that topic. And the idea to tell them, okay, now get off the computer, because they're like, hold on a second, I'm just in the middle of building something. And so the idea is they're in the building mode and they're in the learning mode of how to create. how to create relationships and objects. I mean, Minecraft did a wonderful job at it. They put in the periodic table into Minecraft, which is just beautiful. I think that's amazing. They're building rocket ships. They're building all these different ways to, in Minecraft, figure out hack Minecraft in Minecraft as a Minecraft person, and how to build AI in Minecraft, and all these elements they're learning within that system. So I give Minecraft a lot of credit because I think they're the digital Lego of today. And so that to me is something that I think is fantastic. And I think you really hit a great point about, I know it's something that is, readily said that we just got to rebuild. But I mean, I think it actually has to happen, because when we look at the way that teachers integrate with kids in these multicultural, in these multidisciplinary, in these multi-level of, we have integrated classes, which is all levels. There's no advanced, general and basic like when we were kids, so that, everybody's all working in the same room, and the teacher's now expected to hit all of those different cultural norms. The teacher's expected to hit all of those different success levels within the class, and they have a class of 35 kids. How can we expect them to do that? We can't. So the system is broken because of that.
It's broken, and it's becoming more fragmented by the day as technology advances. And it's like, to your point, you're ripping your kids out of that building phase. But why? Because there is no YouTube MBA. Yeah. If there was some way for me to actually get a degree from consuming YouTube videos and becoming an expert, we would all have MBAs, because we've all become micro experts in certain niches, just like that, just because we needed to. Like, if you need to learn how to post on Instagram, then you watch 10 to 15 Instagram videos, and more than the average person, right? And so it's like, I would love to talk with you about how to use podcasts and YouTube videos, for instance, how to maybe use audiobooks, how to build an AI that can understand, maybe take all of your social media feeds, for example, all of your Netflix history, all of your YouTube watch history, and figure out okay, these things keep your attention. And then you factor in, biomarkers. How did you sleep last night? What is your stress level? Where you're going to school and you're expected to pay attention for 8 hours every single day. What if you had a fight with your family or your romantic partner? It's like, all of these things fluctuate. And if you can build an AI that can understand all of these things better than any one human or group of humans can do, and then serve you up content, different kinds of content, audio, visual, hands-on, social, it's like, that would be so much better, so much more accessible. Even use the metaverse. I want to connect with people in China and in Africa. It's like, we can do this all right now. This is not some futuristic, we have to wait for 10 years and hope there's another Mark Zuckerberg. We could have done this yesterday. Yeah. So I know when you say, it's a fun conversation, and it's, people always say it readily, but it's like, no, I don't want to just say it. I want to actually start building it. And I've taken a couple of steps with that.
It's actually being built. I
don't think so.
It's being built in a couple different models. So there's a couple schools in the States that are being built out right now where they use the model of there is no teacher anymore. Mm-hmm. The teacher's removed from the digital or the physical classroom. The students learn specifically and directly from AI. And the AI is then able to enhance the learning based on the speed in which they're learning. It's able to motivate in the way, because when you have a classroom of 30 or 3,000, the AI can handle them all. I think there was one thing that was called Her. It was a movie with an AI, and then Her was dating this one person. Then she found out that he was dating somebody else, and then they asked her. They said, "Well, how many people are you dating?" "Well, I'm dating 5,000 people," and it's because the AI can handle all of those relationships uniquely and independently. Well, the same thing can happen when you're looking at AI in the classroom, and not that it can date the kids, but in the fact that it can interact with those kids in a way that it's on a one-to-one basis at their pace, and really hone in and then produce amazing analytics. Now, once those analytics are created, that's when the teacher is now replaced with a coach. See, a coach can take that and put the human element into what the data is telling you, but it's got all that data. It can know how fast did somebody respond. Are they having a specific problem with calculus? Are they having a specific problem with a specific element of that calculus where they're taking time? Maybe they're just not connecting at that moment. Maybe they're off daydreaming and they're not paying attention. And you can see that because the AI can watch where the eyes are going. They can see the facial structure. Is that person looking sad, happy? All these expressions can be caught. in a camera basis and digitized and then understood and then fed to a coach. So if we use that element, we can use that style of element in the schools. We can use that element in healthcare, in leadership, in anything that we have where there's a group of people that need to get data or need to produce data, and somebody needs to then analyze that data. AI is a beautiful tool to do that.
It's a beautiful tool, but there are a lot of flaws, and I don't really trust an AI wholesale to record anything in a better way than a human would. Obviously, like for sure, group of 3,000, yeah, we can maybe use an AI to record certain metrics, but I don't want just an AI. So that's why I was kind of going to push back until you mentioned the human coach. Absolutely. I mean, I would love if there was a teacher empowered by an artificial intelligence assistant that every time, a teacher would go up to a child, the AI would be like, these are the child's strengths, weaknesses. This is where he or she or whatever are struggling with. I think that's inherently powerful. I don't know how I feel about it.
Well, it's not the first time it's been done either. It's not the first time it's been done. This was done back when we were kids. It just wasn't done in science. It was done in science fiction. When you look at Star Wars and you look at the Jedi had C-3PO, had R2-D2. We handle a lot of the basic functions of learning and growing and even some basic negotiations. Where then the Jedi or the diplomat or whoever else it was, they handled the higher level of the human connection. Because I think we're always going to have that human connection for humans to interface. The challenge is the speed in which the computers are gathering data. Digital intelligence is going to far exceed biological intelligence in our timeline. In the time that we're alive, we will see that. And that's something that we have to understand and understand how to connect with, especially the next generation, because they're going to be around longer and have to help the generation alpha, the first digital generation, really move forward in a way that's meaningful.
I'd be curious to know what when you say digital intelligence will exceed biological intelligence, are you just talking about this supposed breakthrough to artificial general intelligence? Do you just mean that the amount of processing power will, equal or usurp the amount of on-paper biological processing power? Like what precisely do you mean?
I think a little bit of all of it. I mean, to say that I have any capability to understand what true sentient is, that would be me speaking out of turn. I'm not a specialist on that. I don't have any, knowledge that I just contain. So I would say not an expert. But what I would say is when we look at where artificial intelligence is today, synthetic intelligence is right around the corner. And that the general intelligence, which is the other term being used, I think that's there. I think, we have that ability to be able to understand that. Now, the question is then we have to say, well, what is that intelligence? And is it intelligence that we're looking for? Because that's one thing. If it's sentience, if that's what we're looking for, that is something completely else, different.
Yeah, I would agree. I would push back and say I don't think that we're going to achieve general intelligence from neural networks ever. But I guess that's more pedantic than anything else. I do agree that I think if I were to take the conversation in a different direction, I do agree that digital processing power will be way more powerful than raw biological processing power. And so figuring out how to truly and successfully enact, positive human-robot collaboration is going to be crucial. And I think that's also an opportunity to teach young people how do you interact with artificially intelligent agents. It is going to be interesting to see how young people, if there isn't even an ethical framework to give them.
When you look at the idea of cyborg kids and Gen Z, or cyborg kids and Gen A, Gen Alpha, I think that's where we really start to see digital intelligence exceeding the biological intelligence. Because the biological intelligence, if we look at the integration of the two, the biologic intelligence will use the digital intelligence as a reference point. And so because of that integration, that reference point, the knowledge center that exists within the reference point will far exceed the biological one. The biological is the built on to the other, rather than humans, the digital being built on humans, humans will be built on the digital platform. And if you look at that in that sort of a manner, that you could see then, well, yeah, then the digital intelligence, not sentience, intelligence, I think will far exceed the biological.
Well, from that explanation, I think that's already happened. I mean, if you think about, do brains there's a great video called "Does Consciousness Extend Beyond the Brains?" I don't want to bring consciousness in this, so we'll just umbrella term intelligence with that. But does intelligence extend beyond the brains? Beyond brains? I think absolutely. If you look at your phone, the amount of memory that holds of you, you could just open a note from like a couple of years ago and realize, oh my God, I would have forgotten all of this if it wasn't recorded. Looking at your photos, travel logs, all of those things. So yeah, 100%. I think it's already there. I think what we're thinking about right now are more philosophically dense notions of intelligence, if I may even put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I don't think any of us truly think our phones are smart in that way. But yeah, I mean, I hope we can achieve artificial intelligence that can, do our taxes for us and do all of these things, handle our emails and achieve.
As long as it saves me money.
Right. Yeah. Save us money, time, and energy. Absolutely.
Well, I guess it goes down to who programs the LLM. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever's backing the way that the large language model has been built, LLM, the way that that's been built really dictates a lot about the outcome. So if we're relying on that as our feed for doing our taxes, if it's been built by the government, it's probably going to favor the government over favoring ourselves. So that's one thing we have to think about when we think about relying on AI is who built it. So let's talk about relationships and how the Gen Z deals with relationships in this new digital age. Give me a little bit of your perspective, because all of us as adults are all worried about, are they going to connect with another human? Are they going to build meaningful relationships? Are they going to have children and really propagate the culture forward?
Yeah, so Gen Z's, I guess, relationship to relationships is predicated on technology. And so when thinking about their inability to look people in the eyes, for example, to cold approach, like as a guy, you're expected to cold approach women, for example, it's not looking good. Even on dating apps, we see the ratio, what people always talk about, the 6-to-1 ratio of women don't even go to like their feed anymore. They just look at the amount of likes that they get. With Gen Z, it does seem like we're going to need a real reset on dating. I don't see anything that can help. I don't really see anything that can revitalize dating in the 21st century using technology. It seems like technology as a whole, and I don't just mean dating apps, I mean social media as well. It seems like technology as a whole is a net negative for dating. Yeah, you can make the argument of, oh, but it can connect you with people that maybe you wouldn't have had a chance to, maybe someone in Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver where maybe you would have never seen them in person. Sure, but also, see, one of the things about dating apps specifically is this paradox of choice. And so what happens on dating apps is you sign up, you see all of these people. Let's say you go out on a date with them, which is 1 in 100 as a guy, and you like the person, but you also know in the back of your mind, hey, what if I just like swiped a little more? What if I found someone better? And then you repeat that ad infinitum. And so it's like you think you have access to all of these people, but you really don't. But you're also like interested in seeing, maybe if I super like them or send them a rose or however these dating app interactions go. And so what this creates is like this mental corruption, like a corruption of love, for example.
I don't know if that's much different, to be honest, speaking to the older generations. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're considered a high value male or a high value female from the perspective of, a lot of opportunity, a lot of choice, when you're in the analog world, say back in the late 80s, early 90s, and you've got that wicked Camaro and you've got that sweet, sweet mullet just flowing down your shoulders, and man, you got tickets to Duran Duran. You're in that situation that you can invite anybody. And it's one of those thing about whether you're high value in the digital space or high value in the analog space. I think the opportunity for choice will always exist for high value. The idea is when you're looking at, yeah, absolutely. But that exists both in the digital as well as in the analog space, in my perspective.
It absolutely exists in both, but you qualified it with high value. See, that's the catch, is that you could not be high value and still have perceived access to all of these people. That's to me the sinister part of these applications, is the fact that any such person is going to use these dating apps. And also, why have we eroded our ability to socialize for a sub 3-second swipe? Like, how does that make any sense? You know, there's so much that goes in, like your generation, for example, you all know there's so much that goes into courting someone, and, you know, the butterflies that you get of trying to talk to them, and, you know, the bravery and the social awareness, and then, you know, figuring out exactly what their personality type is, all of that, you know, trying to ask them questions. And it's like, I don't need to do any of that. I have your entire profile. I can see that I like you. I can see you're attractive. I'm hoping that you swipe right on me or like me too. And it's like, what does that do for an entire generation? And then you add on top of that access to not safe for work material, and that is when things get very interesting and disturbing, because now I really don't need the dating apps. I don't need physical connection, because I hate to sound crass, but I have my hand. You know, like, I don't need to try to go out and, because let's be honest, that's what we all do it for, is procreation, right? That's kind of our biological, it's hardwired into us. Yeah. And so it's like, I don't really need to go and put all that effort in, because I can just search up a site to get that feeling out of me in the next 30 seconds.
Well, or even further to that, you can slap on that virtual experience. You can buy that virtual toy. You can, you know, communicate with an AI love bot. There's all these things that you can do that you're not going to have a meaningful connection out of that activity. Now, it's not, you know, too much different than if we go back again to the 70s, where you're going to pop some pill and you're going to go to some party and you're going to have some, you know, meaningless relationship with somebody in an evening, and you're going to go home and have a little bit of regret and maybe have a hangover. And so it's the same thing, just with a different experience. It doesn't involve another person. And so you don't have that shared moment with another person on the planet. It's sort of that individualistic moment. And I don't know if that's necessarily wrong or right. I'm sort of on the fence on that, in the sense that, you know, if somebody's going out there and they've got a self-love lifestyle, you know, and that's the way they're not necessarily hurting anybody. Whereas if somebody goes out there and they have a, you know, love somebody else who doesn't want it lifestyle, then that I would say that that's something that could be bad. And that did happen a lot when we were younger. I mean, you had a lot of, it probably still happens today, but maybe, you know, maybe it could curtail something. I don't know. And I don't know the right answer around that. Because, you know, I think we romanticize those time periods when we look back and say that's when, you know, people were out connecting with people and people were out having meaningful, you know, when you lived it, you weren't having all necessarily meaningful relationships. You were having, you know, instantaneous moments of, you know, somebody slaps your ass, or somebody, like, you know, gives you a kiss and you're like, I didn't want that. And, you know, you have all of these things that happen. And are those more meaningful? I don't know. I don't think so. I think they're just different. And I think the idea is if you're looking for a meaningful connection, you'll go find one. And you'll find one using the space where that person exists. And if you're comfortable in the digital space, you're going to find somebody in the digital space. If you're comfortable in the analog space, I think you're going to go to the analog space and look for it. And you're going to meet that person where you both want to coexist.
I mean, I would hope it worked like that. It's interesting that you bring up meaning as like this precursor to love. Can you say more about that?
Well, I think happiness is something that is fleeting. I think productivity is something that is meaningful. And so when you look at a relationship is about productivity. It's about moving forward together with somebody in life. My wife and I, we've been together for what is it, about 16 years or so. And so has it all been like this lovey-dovey, everything's amazing? No, we've gone through really tough times. We've gone times that we're connected. We've gone through times that we're not connected. We are connected. We've got great romantic moments. We have some blights of darkness in those situations. It's been that way throughout the whole relationship. But the continuity is the relationship, and that's where the meaning comes from. Grant Cardone, who's a guy that I really like to follow, he talks a lot about when they ask him on the iced coffee hour with Graham Stephan, they ask him, do you want your daughter to be happy? He says, no, I want my daughter to be productive. And I think when you look at things from the lens of productivity and you look at a relationship through the lens of productivity, I think you can find more fulfillment out of that rather than just fleeting happiness.
Look, Steve, I mean, I'm with you. I'm just much more pessimistic, and maybe it's because I'm Gen Z. Maybe it's because of immaturity. I have to accept that too. Like, maybe I just don't have enough experience in this world to actually, experientially agree with you. But I just see dating apps as this virus. Not just a virus, like a cancer. I truly mean that. I don't think that. I mean, I've heard some people having success stories with dating apps, but these are just like the anomalies.
See, I look at dating apps just exactly like a nightclub in, the late 90s. Mm-hmm. Exactly the same thing. Everybody's just looking at visually what they see, and if she's dancing really provocatively or he's looking really buff, that's the first thing that you're going to be looking at. You're not going to be thinking, I wonder if they've got a physics degree. That's not what happens at the nightclub. So the nightclub has it's just been digitized and it's just been fed kerosene that just makes it burn hotter and faster. So it's the same environment. It's just something that burns hotter.
I don't mean this as a gotcha moment, but have you ever used dating apps?
Actually, funny enough, my wife and we met on Match.com.
No way.
So yeah, we met on Match.com. We met, I was traveling for work a lot and I could meet a girl anywhere, just not in my hometown because I never was there. Mm-hmm. And so her and we just I kind of flitted around with this app and I'm like, I don't know, let's see what this thing is. And this woman wouldn't stop talking to me. And then we just kept on talking and talking and talking. And we just sent, messages back and forth. And then finally we met and we, we kicked it off pretty quick right away. And so yeah, that was my first inception point of a dating app and it worked out well. And it was really the only date I think I ever did. Maybe I did one other one, but it wasn't I know a lot of the Tinder people, they hit pretty hard on those things. But I mean, when I was younger, the nightclub did the same thing. I didn't go to the app just because I probably didn't have one. You'd go to a nightclub, you'd go to a bar, you'd go to somewhere else. It just did the same thing. It just might cost you a little bit more in buying drinks or whatever.
And I don't mean this as a personal question, but would you allow your kids on dating apps?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I haven't thought about it yet because I haven't even thought about my kids dating. My kids are young. They're 14, 12, and 9. And they're very young. They still, think with very young thoughts. So I'm not sure if I would think about that yet. I haven't put enough thought into it to give a meaningful answer on that. I don't know.
Personally, and again, I'm not a father, but I wouldn't even want my kids to touch dating apps just because of the mental health problems. I can start agreeing with you that maybe there is some rhyming between 70s nightclubs, 2020s dating apps. That environment might be the same, just one is analog, one is digital. Mm-hmm. But the mental health aspect for Gen Z is also we shouldn't touch them. This is more anecdotal, but every single person I've ever talked to that has used dating apps has said my mental health has deteriorated. And personally speaking, I got out of a relationship in January, and I think my mental health deteriorated more using Tinder and Hinge than anything else, because it's such a foreign, alien experience. But maybe I'm just maybe that's just the young person in me talking. Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, I put it back to if it's the dirty 30s and you're going to that prohibition nightclub and you're going and just giving that secret password, going to that dark room and, all the dark things happen in the dark rooms. And so it's not so much different. It's just a different entry point into that kind of a mechanism. And I think the person who's having challenges on the digital space is going to experience the same challenges in the analog space. And, when they go into a bar and they get frustrated and they end up sitting at the bar, not talking to anybody and just getting smashed by themselves, is that a better experience than the person who just closes the laptop and says, well, I guess it didn't work out today? I think they're both tough experiences. And I think that the thing is, and when we look at mental health, I think we also have to change mental health to also form mental toughness. And I think some of the things that we're doing, we really have to work on building mental toughness. Because if it's not going to be a dating app that's going to give us problem, it's going to be finances. If it's not finances, it's going to be, other relationships with friends and family. If it's not that, it could be a physical problem. So I think we're going to run into all of these things that are going to challenge who we are. And if we can build up that resilience, that toughness to be able to handle those situations, it doesn't matter what the application is. It matters how we handle that, because it's not about that. It's how we react to that is what's really important.
100% agree.
Yeah. I think one thing that I'm curious about when we look at the younger generation, and we're noticing a lot of this in sports, and I just want to talk a little bit about sports, because I think sports, at least for our generation, was one of those things. And I think even for the younger generations, it's important for me. So I do have my kids in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and kickboxing to keep them athletic and keep them honed on their mind and their body. But the idea is what are you seeing for the adoption rates in the Generation Z? For continuing with a physical education mindset and that connection of the body to the mind as a go-forward strategy?
I don't have hard statistics, but I can say that finding martial arts has been incredible as a young man. When as you probably know, but when you're a teenager, you try to fight the world, and you think, you can fight anybody, and you have this like facade of confidence, and you treat people a certain way, and then you go to martial arts and it's just like, oh, you realize like where you're at in terms of physical strength compared to everybody else. And regardless of finding exercise and such, which I think is very important, I think that's slightly lost for Gen Z. But I think more people are starting to really acquire this understanding of health and wealth. But yeah, martial arts has been massive in my life, of grounding me, giving me a lot of respect for other people, giving me like a pathway to learn, because you get really addicted to how much you don't know. It's like the Socratic saying of the only thing I know is that I know nothing.
Exactly.
It's such an important thing in my life. Yeah.
Yeah, I think martial arts should be taught to everybody. I love the idea of the Socratic, philosopher warrior. I think it was actually Aristotle, but it was one of the two who talks about the philosopher warrior. Now, as we come to a close for today, what are some of the things that you would want as final takeaways for people when they think about Gen Z and the integration of either the Gen X into Gen Z, the boomers to Gen Z, or just Gen Z to Gen Z?
I'm experimenting right now with creating this cross-generational framework. I think that Gen Z have the biggest opportunity to learn from older generations, and I think that older generations have the biggest incentive to teach Gen Z. I don't know why there is no dialogue between these generations. And I think for Gen Z, my advice would be to put down the stubbornness, put down the ego, to really talk, to not just talk, but to ask questions, to listen, actively listen, take notes, figure out what worked for previous generations, and figure out what doesn't, and then try to implement the same things. And for past generations, I would really encourage giving advice, staying patient, because again, past generations treat us like we're not young. Like past generations, you guys were all kids, you guys were all young adults. I don't mean this in in a condescending way, but it's like, yeah, we're all young adults. We're stubborn. We're incompetent in many areas. We are overconfident in many areas. And it's like, yeah, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to dismiss things that maybe shouldn't be dismissed, but just like be patient, because we're still figuring ourselves out. Like we have to figure out ourselves in the world. And, one riff I have is that it's kind of unfair that all of the past mistakes, the past circumstances of older generations are kind of dumped on Gen Z. And then we're immediately told, oh yeah, by 2050, the planet's probably going to decay. So figure it out. Good luck, guys. And so again, like creating that bridge of conversation, of connection, creating that cross-generational framework of precisely how do we go about building, understanding, I think is very important. And I would encourage both or all generations, frankly, to engage.
I love that perspective, and I love that perspective coming from you, especially because your podcast is called the Gen Z Diplomat, and part of a diplomat's role and responsibility is to create engagements, to create collaboration, and find ways to bring people together. So I think it's a beautiful way to close off the show of the money, of the mindset, and of the mentoring podcast. And Ayush, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Steve, this was great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And guys, we will see you on the next one.